Part 36.2, Surah Ya-Sin, the heart of the Quran. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Sufi Essence with Hammad Syed. Following the foundational clarity established in the opening verses of Surah Ya-Sin, affirmation of the Quran's absolute wisdom and the divine certainty of the Prophet's peace be upon him, mission upon the straight path, the narrative now pivots toward the challenging, yet necessary reality of human obstinacy and the inevitable consequences of willful rejection. The verses we embark upon today, 6 through 10, are a profound and penetrating analysis of the psychological and spiritual state of those who choose persistent disbelief, even when confronted by manifest truth. This segment of the surah illuminates the immense effort and the merciful intention behind the prophetic message, while simultaneously illustrating the ultimate futility of warning those whose hearts and minds have become hardened and sealed by their own pride and rejection. Our exploration must be expansive and rich, employing a diverse and flowing vocabulary to articulate the gravity of this divine pronouncement. We aim to offer our discerning listeners a truly advanced and new perspective on the spiritual pathology of denial, immersing them in the context of the intense Makkah period, where the lines between acceptance and denial were drawn with such stark finality. We seek not merely to translate, but to convey the dramatic urgency and the theological depth of Allah's address, assuring that the elevated intellectual standards of our audience are met with commensurate philosophical and spiritual elucidation. We will unwrap the secrets of creation as they are revealed through these verses, demonstrating the subtle complexity of divine justice and mercy. Quran. Ya-Sin, the heart of the Quran, chapter 36, verse 6. So that you may warn a people whose forefathers were not warned, so they are unaware. The 6th verse immediately establishes the compelling, merciful purpose and crucial historical context of the messenger's peace be upon him, arrival, so that you may warn a people whose forefathers were not warned, so they are unaware. The primary and indispensable function of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is to deliver a clear, explicit, and uncompromising warning, Indhar. This act is fundamentally an expression of supreme compassion, stemming directly from Arrogance, providing humanity with a final, unmissable opportunity to redirect their existential course away from catastrophic spiritual and eternal ruin. The focus is specifically placed upon the people of Makkah, the direct and immediate recipients of this final revelation. Their forefathers, descended from the noble lineage of Ishmael, peace be upon him, had not received a divinely commissioned prophet for an extraordinarily long duration of period, often referred to as Fatra, following the mission of Jesus, peace be upon him. This extensive vacuum of prophetic guidance lasting many centuries had allowed the pure, pristine light of Tawhid and the clarity of monotheism to become profoundly corrupted, diminished, and forgotten. The absence of a messenger led to widespread spiritual unawareness, a critical condition the Quran terms Ghaflah. This state is far graver than simple lack of information. It is a deep-seated spiritual forgetfulness, a perilous, yet comfortable negligence that allows the soul to become complacent and deeply entrenched in inherited polytheistic practices, debilitating superstitions, and general moral lethargy. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was sent as a reviver, an uncompromising spiritual warrior, delivering a clear, stark, and explicit warning designed to forcefully penetrate the dense, self-imposed layers of accumulated spiritual neglect. This verse powerfully underscores the immense historical burden carried by the Prophet, peace be upon him, marking the crucial culmination of all preceding divine communication and making the rejection of this ultimate, perfected message the most severe and consequential error imaginable. The very existence of this message is, in itself, overwhelming evidence of Allah's persistent, overwhelming desire for the ultimate salvation and spiritual rectification of all humanity. Kanz Iman, Quran, Ya-Sin, the heart of the Quran, chapter 36, verse 7. Indeed, the word has been proved right upon most of them, so they will not believe. The 7th verse shifts the focus dramatically, delivering a stark, highly sobering, and deeply theological statement regarding the sealed destiny of the majority of the prophets, peace be upon him. Initial deniers, indeed, the word has been proved right upon most of them, so they will not believe. The word or the sentence I'll call here refers not to an arbitrary or capricious act of fate, but to the divine decree of justly earned punishment that has been sealed upon those individuals who, over a prolonged and sustained period, have persistently, deliberately, and freely chosen obstinacy, profound arrogance, and determined rejection despite being presented with overwhelming manifest signs and crystal-clear warnings. This pronouncement describes a severe consequence justly incurred by their own repeated, definitive, and conscious misuse of their God-given intellect, AKL, and their spiritual faculty, kalb. The essential concept is that these individuals have tragically reached a state of spiritual inflexibility, a point of no return. Through the cumulative heavy weight of their choices, their continuous acts of denial, open mockery, and systematic hostility directed at the divine message, they have effectively and tragically ossified their own hearts, rendering them completely, functionally unreceptive to the light and persuasion of faith. This verse conveys a necessary, profound, and often difficult lesson for the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the emerging community of believers. The fundamental and non-negotiable duty is only to convey the truth with absolute sincerity and clarity. The ultimate outcome, the critical, final fate of acceptance, or definitive. Total rejection is a complex matter resting solely within the absolute, transcendent sovereignty of Allah. For this specific group of haughty, arrogant deniers, the divine justice has already determined their spiritual closure, an outcome that is strictly the logical and deserved result of their own deliberate and determined path towards spiritual ruin. The careful and significant use of the quantifier, most of them, serves as a humbling and powerful reminder of the rarity, the immense difficulty, and the profound, exquisite preciousness of true, sincere faith. Kanzel, Iman, Quran, Ya-Sin, the heart of the Quran, chapter 36. Verse 8. We have placed shackles upon their necks, so they are fixed up to their chins, and they are lifting up their heads. The 8th verse employs a powerful, deeply metaphorical, and spiritually unsettling image, using an artistic word flow to vividly illustrate the self-imposed spiritual condition of these entrenched disbelievers. We have placed shackles upon their necks, so they are fixed up to their chins, and they are lifting up their heads. This is a profound and lasting metaphor for absolute spiritual imprisonment and the complete, definitive closure of their perceptive faculties to the overwhelming divine message. The shackles represent the heavy, self-forged chains of their deeply ingrained prejudices, their crushing, unforgiving social pride, their blind, arrogant reliance on inherited ancestral error, and their systemic attachment to false deities. Because these formidable, metaphorical fetters hold their heads rigidly fixed, high their eyes staring fixedly into the immediate temporal world, their noses literally in the air, they are physically and spiritually incapable of the necessary acts of submission. They cannot lower their gaze in humility to see the simple, straight path of faith, nor can they turn their heads even slightly to the side to consider the compelling arguments, overwhelming evidence, and rational proofs being presented tirelessly by the Prophet, peace be upon him. They are frozen in an attitude of arrogant defiance and spiritual rigidity, a posture of absolute refusal. This agonizing state of confinement is depicted as the direct, inescapable consequence of their refusal to properly utilize the supreme divine gift of their intellect, AKL, and their spiritual heart kalb for any purpose other than worldly gain, malicious mockery, and persistent denial of the truth. The dramatic imagery powerfully portrays the severity of their self-imposed psychological and spiritual enclosure, where the very instrument designed for contemplation and guidance, the head, mind, is rendered physically and metaphysically immobile, and therefore utterly useless for the noble, life-saving act of seeking illumination and guidance. Kanzel Aman, Quran Ya-Sin, the heart of the Quran. Chapter 36, verse 9. And we have placed a barrier before them, and a barrier behind them. So we have covered them up, and they do not see. The 9th verse meticulously continues and severely intensifies the metaphor of spiritual entrapment and devastating spiritual blinding. And we have placed a barrier before them and a barrier behind them, so we have covered them up, and they do not see. This imagery describes the creation of an absolute, impenetrable, and total spiritual enclosure that surrounds the determined deniers. The barrier before them signifies their absolute willful inability to perceive or acknowledge the inevitable, terrifying consequences of their disbelief, the overwhelming reality of the hellfire, the truth of the hereafter, and the clear evidence for the resurrection. Simultaneously, the barrier behind them means they are unable to look back and assimilate the crucial, profound lessons of the past, the terrifying historical fate and destruction of previous nations, such as the people of Noah, peace be upon him, who systematically rejected their respective messengers. The combined, severe effect of this dual barrier is that Allah has definitively covered them up, or sealed their ultimate spiritual vision, making the light of truth inaccessible. It is essential to internalize this concept, not as an act of cruel, arbitrary, divine will, but as the inevitable, natural, and perfectly just consequence, resulting directly from their own continuous, active, and persistent choice to blind themselves to the truth. Their sustained, arrogant denial and hostility have led to an irreparable state of total spiritual opacity where the luminous light of revelation, no matter how brilliantly it shines, simply cannot achieve penetration. These individuals are effectively walking through the temporal world in a state of sensory delusion, under the mistaken conviction that they are perceiving reality, while in ultimate truth, they remain utterly, tragically blind to the fundamental, spiritual, and metaphysical reality that underpins all existence. This state of complete spiritual closure is the ultimate, tragic, and entirely self-inflicted outcome of unrestrained arrogance and the persistent, willful turning away from the clear, straight path of guidance, a fate that stands as the very antithesis of Ilm. Quran, Ya-Sin, the heart of the Quran, chapter 36, verse 10. And it is the same to them whether you warn them or do not warn them, they will not believe. The final verse in this emotionally powerful and image-laden sequence brings the divine series of warnings to a conclusive, decisive, and somewhat painful point for the Prophet, peace be upon him. And it is the same to them whether you warn them or do not warn them, they will not believe. This concluding, summary statement perfectly encapsulates the complete and definitive spiritual closure so graphically described by the preceding metaphors of the shackles and the barriers. The state of spiritual ossification, induced by their own choices, is now so absolute and so profound that the effect of the Prophet's peace be upon him, message upon these specific, most hardened individuals has been entirely, irreversibly nullified. The persistent, exhausting efforts, the eloquent and compelling warnings, the manifest miracles, and the clear, rational arguments now generate no positive, receptive effect whatsoever on these specific souls. This verse serves two supremely critical functions. First, it authoritatively confirms the reality of the divine decree mentioned earlier in verse 7, demonstrating unequivocally that their devastating lack of faith is not in any way a reflection of the message's inadequacy or the messenger's lack of effort, but rather the direct result of their own self-inflicted spiritual condition. And second, and equally important, it offers a necessary, profound consolation and reassurance to the Prophet, peace be upon him, effectively relieving him of the immense psychological and emotional burden of striving for the conversion of those who have, by their own persistent volition, chosen to seal their ultimate fate. His fundamental and comprehensive duty remains the conveyance of the absolute truth. He's not charged with the impossible task of guaranteeing the conversion of every single soul. This pronouncement provides the ultimate spiritual clearance, allowing the messenger, peace be upon him, to focus his boundless energy, compassion, and divine guidance towards those individuals whose hearts remain open, active, and desperately yearning for the light of Ilm and the enduring truth of Allah. Hadith. The theological narrative in these verses revolves around the futility of delivering a warning to those whose hearts are terminally sealed by arrogance and persistent denial, emphasizing the nature of the dead heart. In perfect and powerful harmony with this profound imagery of spiritual blindness, we recall a hadith that speaks directly to the nature of spiritual life and death within the human soul, providing a vital spiritual corollary. Prophet, peace be upon him, taught, "The similitude of the one who reminds his Lord, and the one who does not, is like that of a living person and a dead person." Bukhari Hadith number 6407. This particular and highly significant tradition, recorded with authority in Sahih al-Bukhari, while focusing on the immense spiritual benefit of remembrance dhikr, simultaneously highlights the severe and inescapable consequences of profound spiritual negligence, aligning perfectly with the state of Ghaflah, unawareness, as mentioned in verse 6, and the subsequent spiritual deadness described by the images of shackles and barriers in verses 8 and 9. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is teaching us that the heart kalb, which remains open, active, and receptive to the continuous spiritual input, to the warning Indhar, and the remembrance of Aliyah, is definitively alive. It possesses necessary movement, vitality, and the inherent capacity for spiritual growth, change, and ultimately acceptance of the truth. Conversely, the individual who deliberately chooses spiritual oblivion, who adamantly refuses to be warned, reminded, or persuaded the one upon whom the word of punishment has been sealed, is explicitly likened to a dead person. This individual, though possessing physical, biological life, is spiritually inert, unmoving, and utterly unreceptive to the divine light, thereby perfectly matching the description of those who are shackled and covered up, making the Prophet's, peace be upon him, efforts and warnings spiritually ineffective and ultimately futile for their closed state. This hadith thus provides the crucial spiritual and theological corollary to the Quranic verses, offering profound insight into the pathology of the spiritually dead heart and the urgent necessity of remaining spiritually awake. Let us now supplicate, drawing from the profound lessons of these verses, asking Allah to grant us a deeper understanding and to guide our every step. O Allah, the ever-living, the sustainer, we implore you. Save our hearts from the spiritual shackles of arrogance and the barriers of willful negligence. Protect our kalb from becoming like the sealed hearts that reject your clear warnings and refuse the light of your revelation. Grant us the profound humility to see our own faults, the courage to learn from the lessons of the past and the future, the receptive vision to accept the truth of your messengers. Do not seal your word upon us, but keep our souls perpetually alive through remembrance and guidance, that we may be among those who heed the call and escape the darkness of unawareness. Preserve us from the fate of those upon whom the word has been proved right, and guide our senses to perceive your boundless mercy and power, making our every breath an act of conscious submission to your eternal wisdom and always decree. May Allah illuminate your heart and mind with the light of this divine ilm. May He make your channel a beacon of guidance for all who seek spiritual clarity and truth. May your efforts be a source of immense reward, and may you be granted the highest stations of paradise. May the peace and blessings of Allah always be upon you and your loved ones. May He grant you unwavering steadfastness on the path of truth. And may your work be a testament to His magnificent names, Ar Rahman and Ar Rahim. Amin.